Alrighty. We are back after a very short dinner break, or a long non-dinner break. And we move now to closing arguments. We will do closing arguments in the same order in which we heard the direct presentations. So we'll hear from Mr. Knight, Ms. Sona, Mr. Bach, Mr. Salen, Mr. Domenici, and Mr. Maxwell in that order. And you'll remember the time limits we all agreed to during that second pre-hearing conference, I think, right? 15 minutes, Mr. Knight?
Won't be that long.
All righty. Go ahead.
Okay, I just got to finish chewing first. Madam Hearing Officer, chairs and members of the boards. First, I want to start by acknowledging our hosts, the State Bar Center, for their generous use of the room. I would like to acknowledge our amazing AV staff and interpreters and court reporters who have done marathon work here, all of them. And we couldn't have done it without each and every one of them. And I just want to say, as you know, as the petitioners and proponents of this rule, we are deeply grateful to all these people who have stayed late and come early and done such a really, I have to say, a flawless job. Everyone, and also the board administrator, who is always there and always comes through for us. So. As well, each of you, the board members and the hearing officer, thank you for all the hard work, and we really do appreciate it. I'm not going to advocate too much in my statement. You all have heard all the evidence that I have, and things have gone largely I will say largely as I predicted they would. You've heard passionate and intensely contradictory testimony, and you will evaluate everything you've heard, and you'll give it the weight that you decide to accord to it, and make your decision. So. Some things to keep in mind while you deliberate. You must adopt the rule as written. That's not usually the case. And of course, you don't have to do anything. But if you do adopt this rule and you intend for it to be effective, it must be adopted as written. We are confident there are no typos to correct, and it needs to be the way it is for the reasons we've outlined and in the Federal Clean Air Act and Section 177. And you know, in the spirit of being forthright and completely honest, the only flexibility you have is to adopt all the way through 2035 if you choose to do so. If that's what you decide, that's what we will file with state records, and that's what the rule will be. I suppose in theory you also have, you know, legally you have the ability to adopt for a shorter period of time than we are proposing. But that is really, again, under the identicality requirements of the Clean Air Act, that is really the only flexibility I can offer you with this particular rule, and the way that it interacts with federal law, and the way that the jurisdiction of these two boards interacts. Whatever you decide to adopt, you both must adopt the same rule in order for it to work the way that, in order for it to work. And you must adopt it preferably tonight, but if in any event very soon, because it must be submitted to the state records within the next 2 weeks in order to become effective for model year 2027 as written. Otherwise, the first compliance year for this rule could not be until 2028. So a delay of 2 weeks means a delay of a whole year. And while all of the focus of the testimony and all the controversy this week was on the advanced clean cars portion, please keep in mind that this rule actually consists of 3 parts: Advanced Clean Cars 2, Advanced Clean Trucks, and the Heavy Duty Omnibus. And those last 2 are not opposed at all by anyone that I heard in this entire hearing. And those are major parts of this rule, even though they weren't extensively discussed or debated. They are major parts of this rule, and we presented evidence on what they do and what they are. They have major environmental benefits. The health benefits of those 2 parts of the rule, as with ACCII, are real, they are tangible, and they are significant. What I heard in the testimony this week was that all the dealers said that they are committed to the electrification of transportation, and this transition is happening whether or not this rule is adopted. That is not a reason not to adopt this rule. But all the things that they're afraid of, all the things they say will happen because of this rule, will happen anyway. Adopting this rule will not necessarily make those happen any faster or any slower. Most of the things that I heard them complaining about are occurring right now when this rule does not even exist. If the rule is adopted, the first compliance year would not be until 2027. These rules were adopted through extensive negotiations between CARB and the manufacturers, as I said in my opening, and I will say it again, the manufacturers have remained committed to meeting these requirements and are not opposing these rules. And one thing that might be confusing about that, and one thing that I'm afraid that the opponents of the rule don't fully understand, is that, well, please remember, the ZEV requirements in this rule are by manufacturer, not by brand. So, contrary to what some of the witnesses were stating, the rule does not require individual brands to produce or deliver ZEVs to New Mexico. So some brands that do not have firm plans for ZEV models don't need to be concerned. For example, General Motors could rely heavily on Chevrolet, its Chevrolet division, to deliver ZEVs, and they're meeting that requirement in California. General Motors, the company, is meeting their ZEV requirement in California with just one model from one of their brands, and that's the Chevy Bolt EV and EUV. And for another example would be Infiniti. They could rely on their parent company, Nissan, to fulfill the entire ZEV requirement, and they would not need to deliver any a single ZEV themselves. So with that cleared up, the department does recognize that both regulatory and incentive strategies are necessary for this transition to be successful and to minimize pollution and to maximize benefits. We have control over, these boards have control over one of those. The other, we don't. But keeping New Mexico as a Section 177 state is vitally important to keep our nation on track to meet its climate goals. The manufacturers are watching what New Mexico does in this hearing. Believe me, all of them. The world is watching what New Mexico does in this hearing. And the decision is now in your hands. Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Hearing Officer, chairs, members of the board. We understand it has been a long week. We're very thankful for your volunteerism. I won't repeat all of the thanks that Mr. Knight gave, but the city echoes those as well. I also won't take a very long closing statement in the interest of time, and just echo that should the boards choose to adopt this rule, I'd remind the air board, since we don't have as many rules coming through your docket as the EIB, that the final steps would be issuing a timely final order and signing and submitting the transmittal forms to the State Records Center, which Ms. Este Armijo and I are able to assist with. Thank you.
Madam Hearing Officer, Chair Sweeney, Chair Paul, members of the board, thank you again for your dedication in this rulemaking. Your questions have helped the parties fully explore these important issues, and I think I can speak on behalf of all the parties in applauding your service on behalf of our state. I want to join Mr. Knight in thanking our court reporter, our AV team, the translators, Ms. Jones, Ms. City Armijo, and everyone else who's stuck with us through this grueling week. The past week, I think, has been illuminating for all of us. The advanced clean cars and clean trucks rules implicate questions of climate science, public health, automobile design and marketing, tax policy, and economics, just to name a few. We've heard from distinguished experts and dozens of ordinary New Mexicans. We've even been lucky enough to hear from a few lawyers. We've heard about the urgency of taking action to reduce air pollutants like ozone and particulate matter. Efraim Lopez from the American Lung Association testified that 50% of New Mexicans live in counties affected by unhealthy air pollution. Dr. Rasso testified that we are already violating EPA ozone standards in Bernalillo, Doña Ana, and Eddy County. Dr. Charlton testified about how air pollution can contribute to serious life-changing health consequences for New Mexicans, from asthma attacks to strokes and lung cancer. Mr. Copal testified that adopting this rule is the single biggest step the state and the city of Albuquerque can take to cut deadly ozone pollution. And our expert panel of Ms. Harris, Mr. Kressig, and Mr. Ortiz discussed analysis showing that these rules could prevent 136 premature deaths and over 76,000 cases of respiratory illness in New Mexico by 2050. We've also heard about the urgency of taking action to address the climate crisis. Dr. Charlton testified that climate change is the greatest global health threat facing the world in the 21st century. And I don't think those were actually his words. Those were quoting from a joint statement of 200 medical journals, including The Lancet. He spoke about how emergency room visits for heat exhaustion have more than doubled in New Mexico during the last decade. We heard about how unmitigated climate change will devastate our state with extreme heat, mega drought, deadly wildfires, reduced snowfall, reduced agricultural output, forever changing the way of life for our people. We also heard from our expert panel that these rules would eliminate up to 139 million metric tons of carbon dioxide by 2050, more than the entire state emitted in 2018. That would make these standards one of the single greatest steps our state has ever taken to protect the climate. Finally, we heard about how EVs are revolutionizing the auto industry across the globe. We've heard about how demand for EVs has increased exponentially across the country and in New Mexico in the past few years. We heard about how manufacturers are committing to bold, all-electric future, with major car companies like General Motors and Volvo planning to completely phase out internal combustion engine vehicles by 2035 or earlier. We heard that today's EVs have more range than ever before, how prices are falling rapidly, how battery technology is improving, and how EPA and private companies are spearheading recycling efforts to ensure that critical minerals are returned to the economy. We've heard that an EV owner may save up to $17,000 over the lifetime of the vehicle in reduced fuel and maintenance costs, and that new EVs will be up to $5,400 cheaper on average than comparable gas vehicles by 2027, thanks in part to the Inflation Reduction Act. We heard from Jerry Valdez at the New Mexico Department of Transportation about how the state is constructing a vast network of new EV chargers across the state, and how the state has been awarded tens of millions of dollars in additional federal funding to build even more chargers. We heard public comment from P&M explaining that P&M offers extensive rebates and incentives to promote EV adoption, and that it is ready to support the transition to electric transportation contemplated by these rules. We heard from both Mr. Copal and from Climate Advocates panel of experts that these rules will produce billions of dollars in net benefits for New Mexico, mostly in the form of consumer savings. New Mexicans who are relieved of the burden of paying hundreds of dollars at the pump each month will have extra money to spend on healthcare, education, or starting a business. I urge the boards to carefully consider all of the evidence in the record, including the detailed cost-benefit analyses that NMED and Climate Advocates submitted. It's hard to overstate the breadth, quality, and detail of the evidence submitted by the New Mexico Environment Department in this case. I'm also extremely proud of the witnesses that Climate Advocates put on and the quality of the evidence that they submitted. All of this evidence warrants careful study. But it is also important to take a more holistic view, because this rule has consequences far beyond the confines of the State Bar Center and far beyond 2023. First of all, how will the board's actions tonight or this week be seen from a boardroom in Detroit? We know that automakers are rapidly embracing EVs, but their actions are always shaped by the regulatory environment. Many of the most important innovations in the history of the automobile were the product of government mandates. The catalytic converter was developed in response to stringent technology forcing requirements in the Clean Air Act of 1970. Seatbelts, airbags, anti-lock brakes, and back-over cameras were also mandated. If Chevy or Ford is on the fence about whether to open a new EV factory or whether to bring a new affordable, no-frills electric pickup to the market, what impact might this rule have on that decision? Second, how will the board's action look from Dubai, where the 196 countries that signed on to the Paris Agreement will meet later this month in an attempt to strengthen global efforts to fight the climate crisis? Solving this crisis and ensuring that our children have a livable future requires worldwide action across virtually every industry. Just as New Mexico is now looking to other advanced clean car states, other states and nations will look to New Mexico for leadership and inspiration as they make their own difficult decisions about whether to cut their own climate warming emissions. Third, what's the view from a car dealership in Las Cruces in 2027? There's a lot of uncertainty in this world, but I think we can safely predict that Texas will probably not adopt the clean cars rule. We heard testimony from our expert panel that automakers are already sending EVs to Clean Car 1 states before any other state, and that certain EVs are only available in clean car states. We also heard that experts in the auto industry expect a typical EV will cost about $5,400 less than a conventional vehicle by 2027. If EVs are both cheaper to buy and cheaper to operate, and New Mexico has EVs that are not available in Texas, how much additional money will pour into our state? Fourth, what's the view from Dr. Charlton's emergency room in Gallup in 2030? How many kids will be checking in with severe asthma exacerbated by tailpipe pollution from cars and trucks driving along I-40? How many delivery workers will be rushed to the hospital after collapsing during their shifts from extreme heat? How many folks will suffer acute respiratory attacks after breathing suffocating wildfire smoke? Those issues turn in part on what we do today. Finally, what's the view from New Mexico in 2050? How will New Mexicans look back on this moment in our history? The world will have surely changed vastly from what we have now. But if we have managed to preserve some of our forests so that our children can hunt and camp and fish like we did growing up, if we still have enough water for our farmers to grow pecans and chili, if our indigenous New Mexicans can still inhabit the lands they've called home since time immemorial, I believe we will look back on this day and your decision with deep gratitude and pride. So with that, we urge the boards to adopt each of these rules under consideration in full. And again, thank you very much, everyone, for your time.
May it please the hearing officer, the chairs, and the board, if I can proceed to make closing on behalf of both of my clients, the New Mexico Auto Dealers Association and Autos Garcia. Thank you. I'll thank all the staff also. I want to join in that. It's been actually, when I walked in, I didn't think it would work too well, but it's worked out fine. At least from my perspective, I hope that's similar to other people. I know the Air Board a little bit better than the Environment Improvement Board. I've had the opportunity to appear in front of the Air Board some, so I appreciate getting to know the Environment Improvement Board members. I had the opportunity to start working on this case about 3 or 4 weeks ago. My first sort of flavor of this is, gosh, this is a rush for the transportation security of New Mexico. This petition was filed with a schedule that was backloaded to meet a deadline that didn't even come from New Mexico. And then I further looked at the public meeting / stakeholder engagement, and that doesn't even come close to meeting what the Air Board suggests happens in Bernalillo County. There were zero stakeholder meetings. This was a policy decision from the governor demanded to the Environment Department, which was latched onto by the city, and there was not a shred of analysis done before this rule was presented to see if it meets the requirements of a rule in New Mexico. No comparative studies were done. No neutral analysis was requested, selected, even considered. What you have here is a top-down policy being dictated to these environmental agencies without any regard for their expertise. Zero. This was not the Environment Department rule. This is the governor's rule. This is not the Climate Bureau's rule. This is the governor's rule. They didn't call on any kind of expertise from any regulatory bodies in New Mexico before deciding to pursue this. That's why they had to chase evidence after the rule was already submitted and scheduled and determined to be decided tonight. That's actually what happened. There was a decision made by the governor that you would vote on this rule right now, tonight, and that her agencies would ignore anything contrary to what she wanted to accomplish. The city's been a little bit more neutral, but they haven't done any independent analysis. No one reached out to the dealers at all. None of the consultants that were hired reached out to the dealers. No one considered the consumers. Everyone started this hearing very comfortably telling you this rule affects only manufacturers. I think if anything is clear after this, the purpose of demanding these manufacturer requirements is to manipulate customer demand and to place the burden of this rule squarely on New Mexicans, either New Mexico taxpayers or New Mexico car purchasers. And by placing that burden and by identifying where the burden's going to go, it's going to be passed down through the manufacturers, to the dealers, to the customers. I think some very strong concerns should be in your mind. Is this really appropriate to pass this enormous burden on to average New Mexicans? And has there been a demonstration, considering that the burden of proof has been satisfied? And I will suggest that once we've had an opportunity to actually analyze where this burden will fall, and you consider the requirements, which you probably do when you deliberate, most of you probably know them like the back of your hand, but when you're considering a rule of this magnitude, or any rule, but this is probably the biggest rule any of you will hear during your tenures on these respective boards in terms of total dollar impact and in terms of impact on New Mexico households and how they will function. You are dictating the second biggest financial obligation of New Mexico's families for a decade, or slightly less than a decade, starting in January 26 to January or 2032. You are telling New Mexicans, we are going to tell you what your vehicle will be. We're going to force you to come up with the funding to pay for that vehicle. We're going to force you to accept the limitations and lifestyle changes that go along with that vehicle. And we decided that in Albuquerque. So yes, I agree, people will be looking back at your decision in 2050. And I'm fairly confident that whatever your decision is in 2050, everyone that's looking back on this will be driving an electric vehicle. I don't think there's been any demonstration of this scenario, and I do want to point out the scenario that was used by both NMED and climate advocates is electric vehicle sales would go up to 30% and then plateau to 2050. How can that be possible? There won't even be ICE vehicles on the market for at least 15 years of that time period. So these scientific studies are based on, and which is very common, the baseline analysis, which is used to demonstrate benefits, is based on a completely unrealistic baseline that only New Mexico will have 30% electric vehicles. Most of the rest of the world will have 100%, the US will have 100%, but we'll be stuck at 30% so we can show these massive benefits. In fact, we'll be up there no matter what you do. The question is, what burden are you going to place on New Mexicans 25 months from now and 37 months from now and for those intervening time periods? And I think you have a better idea what that burden is after this hearing. I just want to point out again, just reiterate, and that's why I brought my books here, because I do want to quote a couple of things. So, first of all, I hope you're not persuaded that New Mexico manufacturers will only be required to send 18% electric vehicles in 2027 because there's this myriad of credits and values that some may take advantage of. You haven't seen a single example of anyone taking advantage of those. You have no evidence that that huge bulk, 25% of the initial year mandate will be used up with available credits. With the sales you see now, they are flat. They sold 1% electric vehicles to maybe ordinary people this year, 1%. The credits will not in any way make that up. You're going to be driving off a cliff in 2027. You might be at 5-8% electric vehicles, and you will have a mandate of 43%. That is a train wreck. So the question is, are you going to assist in a transportation train wreck for New Mexico? And the only way you can do that is to ignore the evidence and to ignore what you're supposed to look at. The technical practicability and economic reasonableness of reducing contaminants through this method. I think everyone should feel comfortable now that there will not be confidence in consumers appearing in 25 months to change in any way this dramatic requirement of 1,400%, 1,000%, whatever percent is out there in this very short period of time when none of the infrastructure has been put in place, or very little of it. Very, very few level 2 home chargers. That's what that's the actual baseline in both Climate Advocates and Mr. Copal's documents. That's what supports electric vehicles, is level 2 chargers in basically 95% of the homes that have those vehicles. We're not even close to that. It's not on the horizon. So I question, and I want on behalf of my clients to say, the public process here failed. You failed to gather necessary information about how this would affect New Mexicans. The expertise of the agencies failed. They were instructed to become advocates instead of being regulators and use their experience. And you're about, I think, if you don't sort of put the brakes on, you're about to fail rural New Mexico. It's obvious rural New Mexico will not be able to have a reliable transportation in 2027 or afterwards. They will be buying inflated priced used vehicles. There's no other option. They will have no very few new vehicles to buy. That will be diminishing rapidly over the next few years. So you'll be seeing used ICE vehicles and out-of-state vehicles in rural New Mexico. And the rural car dealerships will be struggling, of course. But why wasn't that presented by the Environment Department? Why did the auto dealers have to come explain to you that the obvious effects of this are on rural New Mexico? There's no discussion in these reports of rural New Mexico. We've heard from the city dealers, and this isn't even going to work in the city. The discussion that the vehicles will be $5,000 lower than ICE vehicles in 2027 is based on a complete fiction. That all of a sudden, going from buying 80 to 90% SUVs and trucks, somehow people in Albuquerque, Santa Fe will be going to buying 80 or 90% small model sedans. That won't satisfy their family. It won't transport them to work. It's simply not going to happen. You're not going to see fleets and fleets of Volts in New Mexico in 2027. You're going to see wholesale non-compliance. You are going to have a disaster on your hands. This rule is going to create a disaster. It's a rush to judgment. It's following California, which we are not. It's building on a non-existent baseline of infrastructure. It's building on a non-existent demand for electric vehicles. And of course, it's mandating things, and I understand and I kind of agree, the regulators have that tool of mandating, and the market has its tool, and the other government agencies can provide incentives. There's certainly no coordination. The incentives that were proposed last year were uniformly denied. So what we have, I just want to walk through some of my notes here. So first of all, before I lose the point, the two portions of this rule that Mr. Knight indicated are unopposed, and my clients are not opposing them, are the heavy-duty omnibus and the clean trucks. That, in fact, is where most of the ozone, most of the NOx, and a large percent of the climate gases are. Certainly that is where the NOx and the health effects are. The testimony was 60% of the NOx emissions from vehicle emissions are from that category. So we are all working to squeeze down the light truck and passenger vehicle 34% to these targets, the California targets, when the federal targets are going to get almost there using emissions levels, fleet emissions levels, which have been tried and true for decades, and people are familiar with them, and so are the manufacturers, and so are 37 other states. So I understand New Mexico might be sending a message. 37 other states have already sent or will be sending the same exact message. We're not ready. We're not willing to place that burden on that segment of our society that needs reliable transportation. When there is no infrastructure, the incentives are not in place, and we're not California. That's what the majority of states like New Mexico are doing. The states that have adopted this, if you look at them on a map, none of them are similar geographically to New Mexico. The only one kind of similar is Colorado, but nothing else has anything close. The other ones, you look at the West Coast, they've been doing this for 20 years. Washington, Oregon, California, nothing like New Mexico. And I think my clients feel that you've broken a trust with them. You agreed 18 months ago to California 1. They all have been working towards that standard. They were told at that time, if California changes the standard, we don't have to adopt that standard. It won't automatically be adopted. And they were told California 1 will remain in effect. And that's what should be done. California 1 remain in effect. The federal emission standards will do what they do. I don't think it's anywhere as dire as the climate advocates witness of saying there won't be a federal standard. The federal standard is a significant reduction of tailpipe emissions, rapidly incorporated, which will result in huge electric vehicle or PHEV sales. Exactly what this rule is. It will be more uniform than this rule. It will be 38 states. It will be 60+% of the vehicles on the road. And it will have that flexibility of, instead of mandating vehicles, of mandating emissions controls and allowing the fleets to have that flexibility to market what the customers need. I want to just focus on really the contradictory testimony. I certainly agree with that statement. So we have the New Mexico Environment Department up here being asked about tribal outreach. We hear tribal outreach, tribal outreach, tribal outreach. Not a shred of data about tribal difficulty meeting these regulations. Not a shred of information of how people will on reservations will actually charge their vehicles, or what will be available if they cannot buy electric vehicles. So all that you heard was some soft talk from NMED that is typical in government to government conversation without any meat on the bones. And it took the dealers to come in, and actually a dealer from Farmington and Gallup to come in and explain there really is no meat on that bone. There is no silver bullet. There is no way that this rule will work for those communities. And that's what they should have been told. Instead of saying you'll save more on gasoline, you won't save more on gasoline. You don't have charging at your house. You're going to pay more for your vehicle. You're going to have less selection. You're going to have to buy it in Arizona. It will be used. That's what they should have been told. But of course, the Environment Department didn't do any of those studies. They weren't neutral. They weren't asked to weigh things. Is this good for the Navajos? Is this good for rural New Mexico? That question was never asked by that agency internally, so they have nothing to report to you. Not a shred of evidence to report to you. Respectfully, what is going to happen, and everybody has their own crystal ball, but my crystal ball is based on the evidence. So the requirements, just to go over them, it has to be economically reasonable, in the public interest, technically practicable, and there has to be prior experience showing this will work. We don't have any of that. What's going to happen is we're going to reach January 2026, take about 45 days from now and add 2 years. We're going to reach that time period when this rule takes effect, and manufacturers will be required to send 43% of their vehicles electric to New Mexico. We will be hoping that the price of those vehicles will improve in that 25 months. It won't. But you will be asked to vote, assuming, based on this evidence, which has these unrealistic baseline numbers and has the selective analysis of base level sedan vehicles, not the 90% that people actually use. You're going to be asked to believe that 43% of those vehicles could be sent to New Mexico and actually sold off the dealers' lots. That won't happen in 2026. You will be asked to believe that infrastructure will improve by 25 months from now. And yes, there will be some public charging improvements. They won't be anywhere near significant to support 43% of the, or 28,000 new electric vehicles. I'm glad we broke it down into numbers instead of percentages. You will be asked to hope that in that short 25 months, there will be significant range improvement. It won't happen. If it was going to happen, you'd see it happening. You'll be asked that there will be a 180 on range anxiety by January of 2026. How is that possibly going to happen? There will be only a few more vehicles on the road between now and then. You'll be asked, most importantly, that price affordability will improve by January of 2026, essentially right around the corner. That's not believable. That's simply not based on the record.
Please wrap up, Mr. Domenici.
So after you review the evidence as you're required, and of course you're being asked to rush to judgment, and I understand that, and that's completely your prerogative. There's very useful information in the record. There's letters from the Navajo representatives, democratically elected Navajo representatives, opposing this regulation because it harms their constituents. I don't know if you'll have a chance to review those because there's a big record, but whatever record you are able to review, if you think it's a thorough enough review, I hope you come up with the decision that this regulation cannot and does not meet the requirements for you to enact it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Maxwell.
As we close this day, let us consider the feasibility of adopting California's standards in New Mexico. Our state's unique landscape and its economic conditions distinguish us from all others. If this timeline worked for California, it still prompts the question, are we equipped to take on the burden of proof lies with the petitioners. The presumption that a significant segment of our population...
Hold on, Mr. Maxwell. I'm sorry, you're not coming through quite loud enough.
Where does the record reflect I've stopped?
Our state's unique landscape.
Our state's unique landscape.
Our state's unique landscape and its emissions distinguish us from all others. If this timeline worked for California, it still prompts the question, are we equipped to take on the same transition? The burden of proof lies with the petitioners. The presumption that a significant segment of our population will seamlessly transition to an electric vehicle future. Not only overly optimistic, but it displays a lack of wisdom of our state's realities. Our state's existing infrastructure challenges pose tall hurdles for this initiative. New Mexico's expansive and rugged areas encompass not just towns, farms, and ranches, but colonias, where existing infrastructure is essentially non-existent. Many of our residents, who may be perceived sophisticated by some, practical individuals by all account, they depend on these gas vehicles, mainly trucks, to maintain independence for their daily survival. Consider the practical challenges faced by residents in the rural areas of this state. They often have to deal with rough terrain, scattered with stickers, sharp and cacti, stretching charging cables across these to reach their vehicles. These vehicles are usually parked on caliche or dirt pads, exposed to the elements all year round, because many country homes don't have garages. In contrast, the urban areas of New Mexico, which same sticker, rocks, and cacti, you got them too.
Hold on, Mr. Maxwell. Repeat the last dozen words or so.
Because many country homes don't have garages.
These vehicles are usually parked on caliche or dirt pads, mine included, exposed to the elements all year round, because many country homes, they don't come with garages. In contrast, the urban areas of New Mexico, which also share those same stickers, the sharp rocks, the cacti, present, and they have a different set of issues, particularly concerning in multifamily living spaces. There's this likelihood of an emerging market for poor quality charging cables, which is significant fire safety concerns. Residents may resort to risky methods to charge their vehicles over extended distances, especially in situations where parking lot chargers are limited. It's a reality that for the foreseeable time, not every parking spot, nor for that matter, in New Mexico, will be equipped with the charging port. This highlights our need for a thoughtful and slower approach to the infrastructural challenges brought by the petitioners. Those who have chosen to own an electric vehicle now, a small number, they are the pioneers. They generally care for their property, and they have a safe method to charge their vehicle. A lot of them are waiting a year to get this vehicle. This won't translate easily to the larger population, especially on an expedited time frame. Given that the people can be unpredictable, where was the fire marshal's expert opinion in this conversation? The transition to electric vehicles entails more, much more than just replacing gas engines. It requires a lot of what is beyond the authority of the boards here today. The proposal necessitates not only a comprehensive overhaul of our transportation infrastructure, including accessible charging stations, idealistic, and close to home manufacturing facilities and maintenance facilities, then that's so logistically problematic. What it really requires, though, is a comprehensive legislative redress. Consider the burden this workaround thrusts upon all businesses, and particularly housing providers in urban areas. It's disproportionate. It really overlooks the associated with installing these charges.
I'm sorry, where did you stop hearing it, Mr. Sanchez?
Consider the burden this work around rests upon all businesses and particularly housing providers in the urban areas.
Again, consider the burden this workaround thrusts upon all businesses, and particularly housing providers in urban areas. It's disproportionate. It really overlooks the high costs associated with installing these chargers. Every business where people park, whether they be employees or customers, will need these chargers. This could affect those in low-income, high-density housing the most, especially as the free market for used vehicles rise. The concerns about our electrical infrastructure capacity are crucial and insufficiently addressed by these petitions. If utility companies and landlords are unable to support the necessary upgrades, the residents, again, many of whom struggle with poverty, brunt the consequences. The optimistic assumptions of this proposal overlook the practical and logistical challenges New Mexico faces, and we have created a gap between proposed ideals and feasible reality. This initiative appears to advocate for a government-driven setting.
Oh, driven, say it again?
This initiative appears to advocate for a government-driven economy.
Thank you.
Yet the required infrastructure is notably absent. In large self-productive regions like Southeast New Mexico, to spearhead this monumental task and risk seems overly ambitious. Furthermore, the speculative nature heard here should be concerning. One assumption that electricity costs for charging will remain low, particularly in the context increase on your power grid's draw. It just overlooks common economic principles. You heard it today. Supply and demand. Supply, demand. To illustrate further, this understanding mirrors the classic carrot and stick paradigm, where the initial allure of low rates eventually gives way to the harsh reality of escalating costs. As advocates of these currently affordable rates, chart the course for sharing the grid with many, many more people. There looms a substantial likelihood that their support will wane once the practical and economic realities come to pass. As the true impact on our energy infrastructure and market dynamics of this sudden shift become a reality, the promise of low rates will just be a thing of the past. Directly related to this feasibility of a sharp increased strain on the electric grid unresolved issue many in here are all too familiar with. We're New Mexicans. Strangled energy production, where similarly, well-intentioned plans in fields like nuclear have led for decades to complications. The expectation that electricity costs are going to remain low for charging, it just fails to see the bigger picture of when these vehicles are forced to be the primary mode of your transportation. Misconceptions were heard about the maintenance costs of these cars, such as, well, you only have to change the tires. Like their gasoline counterparts, electric vehicles also require significant upkeep for various mechanical components, most notably the suspension assembly of your vehicle from the wear and tear of all the friction you cause while moving, turning, hitting bumps, potholes. Not any of the posts in Albuquerque now. You need to stay away from those. That was a joke. Okay, laugh. Simplified or incorrect assumptions cannot stand in the face of reality. The changes in the petitions are an overreach of the board's authority, potentially creating undue economic hardship for New Mexicans, and may not be in the public interest. Contrary to Section 5, F, subsection 2 of the Air Quality Control Act, and showing a sincere lack of consideration for New Mexico, of which should go unnoticed by these boards. I rest my case.
Thank you, Mr. Maxwell. We have a new interpreter, Melinda Gonzalez Hibner, Hibner, and she needs to be sworn in.
Madam Hearing Officer, may I ask that interpreter Amelia Cardeña be excused?
Yes.
Thank you. She's online.
Mr. Sanchez, will you swear her?
Yes. What is her name? Ms. Hibner?
Yes.
Ms. Hibner, would you raise your right hand and be sworn under oath, please? You ready? Hello? Are you there?
Lisa's going to make sure she's on the right channel. Just a moment. Yes.
Ms. Hibner, I need to swear you in, please. Will you raise your right hand? Ready? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that your testimony in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
But she's an interpreter. Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Will your interpretation be done to the best of your ability? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anything further, Ms. O'Grady? No, ma'am. All right, thank you. We have come now to the closure of the record, and it is time to turn the matter over to the boards. As I understand, Madam Chair Sweeney, you'll have a discussion with your board as to whether they're ready to deliberate and the logistics of all of that with your other board members and council, and then turn to the Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Board for that same discussion. So I'm going to turn off my microphone and
for a quorum.
We just wanted to.
All right, can you hear me? Ms. Jones, we were wondering if you wouldn't mind doing a roll call, just to document that our EIB board members are present, just for the record.
Okay, roll call this evening. Member Bitzer, are you present? Member Honker is absent. Member Ely, are you present? Member Garcia? Vice Chair Trujillo? Present. Chair Sweeney?
Present.
You have a quorum.
Much for that. Okay, so now that we have documented a quorum, let's see, and just documenting as well, the record has closed for this hearing. And okay, here we go. And I just want to check with my fellow board members if the board will, if you would like to immediately deliberate to make a decision on the proposed rule. And so just looking around and checking, yes. No.
I have a question for council.
Sure.
Can we perhaps move to summary judgment on trucks and heavy-duty vehicles, since there seems to have been no opposition on those?
So it's my understanding that y'all want to.
Legal counsel.
That's my understanding that if you guys want to adopt the rules, then they need to be adopted in their entirety. If you guys want to discuss that, you've come to an agreement on those two portions, you're welcome to do that. But at the ultimate vote needs to be on the entirety of the rules. Right.
Member Bitzer, do you have a follow-up question?
Well, this makes things a lot harder than it would have been if we could have taken care of the two easy ones, the low-hanging fruit, and then tackled the nettlesome one.
Informally, you all can agree, and then we can incorporate that into the final vote if that's what you decide. Does that make sense? So you don't need to have a full discussion on that.
Okay.
Yeah, we've done things like that in the past, so I think that's what he's after, yeah.
Okay. Are you good, Member Bitzer?
With deliberating now?
Yes.
Sure.
And Vice Chair Trujillo Davis?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Wonderful. So, so as you shared with us, legal counsel Bowen, it's about looking at the entire rule as a whole. So I don't know if you want to kind of discuss the entire rule as a whole. I know in the past we went line by line, which I know it's been long, and so from my understanding, and please, I'm open to additional comments, we have the proposal by, the language proposed by the department, and then we also, and correct me if I'm wrong, legal counsel, the language proposed, or the proposed by Clean Air Advocates. Those are the two proposals we have on the table in terms of language.
That is correct. And I can provide you guys, if you don't already have it pulled up, the factors that you have to consider in deciding whether or not to adopt these. That's under section 74
2-5. I can send them to you if you would like them in writing, because they're rather lengthy. But number one, you have to consider all the appropriate facts and circumstances. This is the totality of the circumstances consideration. You have to consider the character and degree of injury to or interference with health, welfare, visibility, and property. That's number one. The public interest, including the social and economic value of the sources and subjects of air contaminants. That's number two. And number three, the technical practicability and economic reasonableness of reducing or eliminating air contaminants from the sources involved, and previous experience with equipment and methods available to control the air contaminants involved. So like I said, that's rather lengthy, so I'm going to go ahead and send it to you all so you have it in writing. There is and I'm sorry, just one more.
Yes.
There is a secondary requirement that you guys must consider, because this will be more stringent than the federal act, which is that the proposed rule will be more protective of public health and the environment.
And just for clarity, and again, we're on the record in our deliberation, Legal Counsel Bowen, that's under section 74-1-9.
That's under section 74-2-5.
Dash 2, sorry.
That's okay.
Dash 2.
And I'm going to go ahead and send that to you all so you have it in writing.
Okay. So with that, I just want to open up the discussion with the board. Given the the considerations that Legal Counsel Bowen shared, if anyone wants to jump in on your thoughts, of course the floor is open. Yes, Member Ely?
You mentioned the markup by the Clean Air Advocates, so kind of in the spirit of getting things off the table, I would suggest that we do not consider or do not vote to include that proposed amendment that would have the rule go out to 2035, because I believe my reading of the Air Quality Control Act is that anybody can come to the board with a proposal, and that this language is not needed, and if they wanted to come to the board in 2029 or whenever, they could. So I'm, just to put that piece aside, I would suggest that we opt not to include that language in anything we might adopt in the rule.
Thank you for that, Member Ely. Is there any other comments regarding Member Ely's point? Yes, Member Garcia, and I'll get to Vice Chair Tree.
Thank you, Member Ely. I would agree with that. And also, just for to help us move along, it's always helpful to make sure we're all on the same page about a couple of points. And that would be that aside from perhaps agreeing with Member Ely on the proposal by the Clean Air Advocates, aside from that, that we all agree that if our choice here is we either agree to adopt the amendments to Part 91 and 104, and if we don't do that, that the state would revert back to federal rules. And that I just want to make sure we're all on the same page about that before we move forward. The other thing that's a little tricky also is that the Advanced Clean Cars 1 would not be in effect either. So I want to make sure that we're all on the same page about that as well.
Thank you, Member Garcia, for that. And Vice Chair Trujillo, were your comments going to be would they be commenting on what Member Garcia just shared?
Yes, I was just going to support Member Ely's approach to that as well. So it was just a statement of support.
Okay, thank you. So Member Garcia, thanks for bringing up those additional points. Should we maybe, unless, do you have any other comments regarding Member Ely's comment about Clean Air Advocates proposal?
I would concur with Member Ely's
Okay.
notion.
Thank you.
Point.
So maybe we can clear that one up at least, and then address your comments, Member Garcia. And so with that, Legal Counsel Bowen, we would need a motion, right? To kind of, that's what we did in the past, just so that we're clear that that's what we're gonna do.
You're more than welcome to do that.
Okay. I don't know, Member Ely, if you want to attempt a motion?
So I moved that we reject the proposed amendments in Climate Advocates Exhibit, as written in Climate Advocates Exhibit 2A.
With that, Legal Counsel Bowen, do we need a statement of basis or a justification for that motion to support it?
No.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Member Bitzer. All right, so it looks like we have a motion on the floor and a second. Is there any further discussion regarding Member Ely's motion or comments? If not, Ms. Jones, would you mind doing a roll call vote on Member Ely's motion and Member Bitzer's second? Okay. Yeah, we'll just go through a roll call, just because we have a lot of folks watching. So.
Okay, very good. A roll call on Member Ely's motion. Member Bitzer, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Member Ely?
Yes.
Member Garcia?
Yes.
Vice Chair Trujillo?
Yes.
And Chair Sweeney?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. So we'll get to your comment, Member Garcia. And I don't know if folks, I know it's been a long day and long week. Does anybody have any further comments regarding Member Garcia's comment? Point? I don't know, can you repeat it again? At least for my brain is trying to absorb this whole process.
Sure. It may be obvious and everybody already agrees, but it's just always good to make sure that we're all on the same page, and that is that we understand that our choice here is we either agree with the proposed amendments to Part 91, 104 as proposed by the Environment Department. If we don't do that, if we don't adopt it, then what happens is the Advanced Clean Cars 1 is not in effect, and the state would revert to the federal rules. So just...
Yes, Member Bitzer?
Council, do you concur with that explanation?
That's my understanding.
That we need to reaffirm our year-and-a-half ago commitment to CC Clean Cars 1, or Advanced ACCII, Advanced Clean Cars 1, in order to maintain it?
Yeah, it needs to be identical in order for it to be enforceable.
So we're not considering yet Clean Cars 2?
No, I'm sorry. If, in order for it to remain enforceable, you have to pass Clean Cars 2.
Yeah? Okay.
As
I wasn't
it's
sure the way it was
proposed by,
explained.
Yes.
Okay. So this is the big motion then?
Yes, and maybe again, another way that my brain's understanding it is it's either we do Clean Cars 2 or it's the federal, right? That's my understanding. And is that Legal Counsel Bowen, is that, okay, she says yes.
That's how you remain a Section 177 state.
Yeah. So, Member Bitzer, I don't think Karen is making a motion. I think she just wants to make sure everybody understands that that's one of the consequences if we vote it down. Or Member Garcia.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Member Ely. Do you have any questions on that, Member Bitzer?
Clear as mud now. It's like I thought we had Advanced Clean Cars 1 in the rearview mirror for good once we passed it a year and a half ago. And evidently it's now on the chopping block if we don't move ahead with Clean Cars 2.
That's how I understand it as well. Okay. Vice Chair Trujillo, do you have any comments?
I don't.
Okay.
I think I understand. Good.
Okay. All right. So the next point of discussion would be the department's proposal in its entirety, since we voted and moved away from the Clean Air Advocates language. I don't know if anybody want to jump in on some discussion points regarding the department's proposal. Looking around. Member Ely?
Yeah. This afternoon, as they were providing closing comments, kind of summarizing some of what we've heard and trying to line those up with the requirements in the Air Quality Control Act under 74 to 5 paragraphs. I think it's 3 paragraphs, E, G, and F and G. And so, it might be helpful to have a discussion about whether we meet those requirements based on some of the information that we've heard, because that's our obligation as a board, right? Mm-hmm. And so, is this proposal more protective of public health and the environment than the current federal standards? And I believe that ERG made a good case that it is. Mm-hmm. They demonstrated that the rule would provide greater emission reductions of criteria pollutants and greenhouse gases than the federal baseline, and that those decreases would result in significant public health savings and decreases in illness, mortality, and morbidity in New Mexico.
Thank you, Member Ely. Is there any other discussion from other board members regarding some of the documentation and the record that was submitted?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
If it helps, I can provide a little bit of guidance. Substantial evidence, that seems a little vague, I'm sure. The courts have defined it as evidence that a reasonable mind would regard as adequate to support a conclusion. So it's kind of a low standard, but it is a standard nevertheless.
Reasonable mind? That precludes me. I can recuse myself now. No one's ever accused me of having a reasonable mind.
Thank you for that, Legal Counsel Bowen. Yes, Vice Chair Trio?
I think another portion of that section that you pointed out was economic reasonableness of reducing or eliminating air contaminants. And I will say that I had some misgivings about that as far as the evidence that was presented by ERG. I got that acronym right? Yeah. Yeah, ERG. Mostly my misgivings were in that I questioned whether that was representative of a New Mexico resident, of how it impacted a New Mexico resident, and also how I didn't feel like it accurately, at all actually, not even accurately, at all, demonstrated the impact to New Mexico, the business community and the New Mexico economy specifically. I just felt that it was lacking there, and I had some misgivings about that.
Thank you for that, Vice Chair Trujillo. Is there any other comments regarding that? Yes, Member Bitzer?
I'm really torn. You know, I've spent my whole life struggling to breathe in one way or another, whether it's allergies or bronchitis or bronchial pneumonia. I swim like a mad dog these days to sort of keep the lungs in great shape. But I get that there would be substantial health benefits if it played out the way it's envisioned, but with the ability of folks to substitute, you know, buying cars out of state and circumvent the intention, the good intention of this rule. I'm not sure that we would yield near the benefit. We also have the risk of encouraging people to continue to drive the nasty old beaters that we ought to be getting off the road, that you can actually see the tailpipe emissions. And one of the public testimony folks talked about when he came into Albuquerque, he had to roll his windows back up, and I do the same thing. I change the vent from external air to internal air. I get the windows up. I change lanes to avoid the super mobile point emitters that are legion, and that this might inadvertently actually keep on the road longer if we intervene in the market mechanism of supply, fresh supply of vehicles. Like folks said, Texas is not likely to close that door. I don't know that Arizona will either. And we're not California. We don't have our population center far away from bordering states like California does. If you want to leave California, you want to leave urban California to go buy a vehicle, you got a long haul. And then you're likely to be in another a similar state. So I don't know. I'm just, it's really hard. I'm a little concerned also about the swiftness, the lack of stakeholder input, and the economic upheaval that I'm afraid we're going to compound. We already do a lot to damage our own economic viability in a lot of ways. I used to oversee the regulation and licensing department before I was at Human Services, and our regulations create 10 to 25% higher cost of doing business on this side of the border just versus just over a state line. So we're our own worst enemy in some regards, and I'm afraid that this might compound some of that without having near as much of the intended benefit as we would hope. So that's where I'm leaning right now, but I'm eager to hear most of the rest of you weigh in as well. So.
Thank you, Member Bitzer. Any other? Yes, Member Garcia.
Thank you, and I appreciate everything you just said, Member Bitzer, because this, you know, our decision impacts a lot of folks in New Mexico in lots of different ways. And one thing I was originally compelled by the Environment Department when they said, oh, this is, the burden is on the manufacturers, nobody else. Well, we've learned through testimony that's not entirely true. While the manufacturers are the ones that have to comply and may be penalized if they don't comply, obviously the entire population is impacted, and dealerships are clearly impacted in a way that I didn't realize. So I learned a lot about the real day-to-day issues they have to deal with, and I could hear the concern in their voices. I can hear, you know, very serious concerns, and they're very passionate about their businesses, and they want to keep their businesses going, and how they juggle all the things they have to do, I don't know. But I also have thought about, well, if we don't do this now and say, okay, they need more time, New Mexico needs more time, we need more time for infrastructure. What would be different if somebody came back in 2 years or 3 years? What would be different? Things move pretty slowly in New Mexico. Back last year when we passed Clean Cars 1, the department said, we're going to be getting a lot of money, we're going to put in a lot of infrastructure. Well, it takes a long time, and things move slowly, and I think, and obviously, there's not enough infrastructure. But what would be different if we don't pass this now? What would be different if we wait? Wait how long? 2 years, 3 years? Would the dealers be coming back saying the same thing? We need more time, because things move slowly. So I'm not sure how much further along, how different things would be if we waited. And I do get the feeling that the idea, I think, is if this rule were passed, then there would be more choices for New Mexicans, there would be more electric vehicles available, plug-in hybrids, et cetera, because the manufacturers have to send them to the Section 177 states. So the idea is, well, this would really kickstart things, and we would get more money, we would get more infrastructure. Supposedly the tax incentives would be passed in the next legislative session, we hope. But I just, so if that's true, then if we pass this, then in a couple of years, we may be further down the road. If we don't pass it and we wait a couple of years, are we going to be any further down the road? I don't know. So that's just my comments right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Garcia. Yes, Vice Chair Trujillo.
Yes, I just want to follow up on both Member Bitzer and Member Garcia's comments, because they both had a number of comments that I agreed with. But overall, I had a very optimistic view of the evidence that was presented by both NMED and the Clean Air Advocates about where we're going, and also just moving towards the electrification of motor vehicles. It was just very, very positive to see. And I believe in innovation, and I think a lot of that actually comes from my oil field background, because I think that, and this spoke directly to the infrastructure portion of it. I think that if there needs to be more chargers, there's going to be a group of people that are out there getting that done. I mean, people drilled wildcat wells before there's a pipeline. So I think, like, as we move forward in this innovation, like if there's infrastructure needed, there's going to be people willing to get that done. And so that was a little bit of less of a concern for me when I was weighing the decision for this. So for me, what it came down to was a choice of whether we need a mandate to reach the goal, or if we let the market kind of take care of that alone. And I had concerns, and Member Garcia spoke to this directly about, we passed the Clean Cars 1, and we passed it in May of 2022. Man, those years are starting to slip together. And there was an opportunity for our legislature to put in these incentives, and they didn't. And I question the priority on their end, and I feel like we're making, if we go ahead and pass this rule, are we passing it on a promise that this is going to happen? And the department said directly that the department acknowledged that incentives are necessary. And the majority of what was presented in their economic report was with incentives, with rebates, and so that that portion of that really just it kind of sticks with me about cashing a check that you don't quite have the money for. And so essentially, I'm concerned about artificially inflating the market, and then it will self-correct, right? Like every market, even if you artificially inflate it, it will self-correct. And at what cost to New Mexico? Sorry, I'm just kind of looking over my notes here.
And I think Member Ely has a comment.
Oh,
Member Ely?
I just wanted to note that I was surprised, but ERG said their economic analysis for the individual did not even include the federal rebate, let alone a state rebate. And still, the payback was short and significant in both the start year and then later in 2030. So to me, it sends a strong signal that the lifetime costs.
Yes.
Up front, they may pay more, but especially if they have a charger at home. If they don't have a charger, the payback is not as quick. But the savings can be significant for an individual, even without the tax rebates. Now, ERM, Climate Advocates, they included the tax rebates in theirs, and that may be what you're thinking about.
It was, and I think it was just for the federal.
Just the federal,
Correct.
yeah.
No state.
Nobody included any potential state
Correct.
rebates in there, yeah.
Yes, that's definitely one of the things I was thinking about, because I mean, you talked about rebates over and over again, but you actually made a really good point there about having the home charger as being very important. And we heard a number of comments from people, public comments, comments through testimony about having your home charger, charging at home or charging during work hours and different places like that. And what was not lost on me in those comments was how much privilege was associated with those comments. And so when I think about inflating the market and the economic, potentially what happens with that is all the people that, or just the people in that who have the privilege of charging at home, in their own home, and the people who get to go to an office and charge in an office, and all the people who don't. And that's my concern.
The economic argument that I'm hearing well spoken on both sides. From my perspective, it's not really my place to say this is in your long-term economic benefit or even your short-term economic benefit. You are in charge of you. You're an adult, you're 18. My looking after your best interests ends when you become an adult. If you're a minor, it's one thing, but when you're a kid and you're an adult and you're out there, you're a head of household, could be a household of one, you could have a family, but it's not my place to say you're going to save money and therefore I'm going to make you do this. So I sort of discounted the hey, it's in your best economic interest, because it's not my place to tell them. The citizens of New Mexico, the residents of New Mexico, that they'll be better off. It's up to them to make that decision, in my mind.
I agree with that, Sir, but I also think that if it's economically attractive, they might be more likely to adopt it and have better market penetration. And then, of course, there's the economic impacts of the health effects. Mm-hmm. And I was really, and I worked on climate policy a long time. I really believe we have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but getting a 43% reduction in NOx emissions by 2050 is huge, especially for a city like Albuquerque that is probably going to go non-attainment next time the feds revise. And that also has large economic consequences. So to address the public health impacts and to address the impacts to other businesses, if we go non-attainment in any other areas is, I think, something this rule does well. And I think considering those impacts conform to some of the things we're supposed to be thinking about under the Air Quality Control Act.
Thank you for that, Member Ely. And I think in terms of the economic analysis, and this is something that was brought up, and I just want to share this thought. Why I was asking the questions about our tribal and Pueblo nations, and I don't know, this just comes from my work, is, those areas are sovereign nations. And so one of the things that has been challenging is how to have the engagement of tribal leadership. There's a difference between tribal leadership and those that make decisions for a jurisdictional area rather than the tribal members. And it's always like a really hard navigation because like me, I would never speak on behalf of any tribal nation because they're sovereign, right? So and I didn't, just to share, I've looked through all the public comments and tried to see, if a governor or a president from one of the tribal nations issued any comments regarding tribal nations or Pueblo nations, and I didn't see any. So I just want to be hesitant, but also acknowledge the sovereignty of our tribal nations and Pueblos here in New Mexico, and understand that there's a relationship, and that's why I asked the department a couple of times about their engagement with those tribal nations. And in the state of New Mexico, there's the State Tribal Collaboration Act, which just encourages the state to engage with tribes and Pueblos. And unfortunately, as of today, there's no requirement like we would have at the federal level to actually consult with tribes and nations, which is one of those things that I know that many of tribal leaders want more teeth, if you will, to that engagement. So I just wanted to bring up that one of the challenges for me is how do we integrate or open and engage that door. And I think there's still a lot of work that needs to happen in that area, and to understand the complexities between the federal, state, and tribal nations and all the jurisdictional puzzles and how they dovetail and how they don't dovetail or apply or don't apply. And I don't think right now, just what I've seen and read in the rule, really, there's no real, it's so complex that this rule can't even attempt to address this way or that way regarding that. So I just wanted to chime that in, and what I'm seeing from that perspective. And I know in terms of the economics, like I shared a number of times, is a large part of New Mexico is federal and tribal and tribal lands that are in fee and trust and a whole host of different jurisdictions. So that's the other complexity, I think, that I kept asking the state how that will continue to evolve over the years. And I guess for me, I don't know how that will be. There's still uncertainty there, is what I see. So I don't think we can fully I wouldn't never feel comfortable speaking on behalf of a tribal nation because I'm not a tribal leader. But even the complexity with the tribal members and their financial status and their financial realm and considerations.
You had a state rep and a state senator weigh in who have a high degree of Native American constituents there. They, of course, don't speak for every one of their constituents, obviously. There's no uniformity of things, but I found that eye-opening to a certain extent. I know Republicans are probably all a monolith on this, but I saw Democrats cross over on that. So that was food for thought for me as well. I don't know them well. I used to work in the legislature, but that was some years ago. So unless you've been up there 20 years, I probably don't know you anymore.
Thank you. Yes.
I just want to speak to Member Ely's point, because I agree with something needs to be done swiftly. Like, I don't agree with the let's take it really slow approach. And so I think that I really just have a comment, because I think that the health impacts are just such a huge portion of this and incredibly important to weigh in there. And, I think that's what makes part of this a very difficult decision, because we are almost trying to predict the future in a way. And that makes this decision very difficult.
Yes, and I also, one of the things that I found challenging through this process is I'm really glad we got to hear from various perspectives. As was noted in one of the filings of the comments we made, in particular Vice Chair Trujillo and myself on the first round, was that this process, this hearing, rulemaking and the hearing process, and how, in particular, the Automotive Dealership Association and those individual dealerships could become a party to the hearing, I thought was really helpful, because we've seen it on other hearings. So it was good to hear that. One of the things that I've been kind of trying to navigate in this is that what was on record in terms of the expert testimony, and then the testimony provided. And I just want to, share what I've been struggling with is how there were discussions and testimony that went off of what was originally submitted, and it made it, I think, difficult for me, because there was times when I was like, well, I wish I could have asked, and knowing about the hearing process, that if some of this evidence or these points were brought up on record, then the other parties like NMED and Clean Air Advocates could address it. And so, like, kind of the weight of what we're discussing today is, what's on record. And I think Hearing Officer Orth said this at one point is, is it fair that new evidence is brought what's the fairness in terms of the process? So that's another point, because it's like when something is mentioned, then it's kind of like I was using this metaphor, the genie's out of the bottle, and that due process was something that I'm trying to navigate in my head. So I have a lot of discussion, and then our respective backgrounds and interests, and what we know just from our backgrounds in our profession, and what we've experienced as regulators or industry, or folks that have served in political offices and support, like you, Member Bitzer. So I just wanted to kind of share that I'm having to go back, and I had to go back the last few nights back to the actual record whenever those, I guess we kind of veered off and away from the record of what was submitted. So like for the example on the economic analysis, I didn't really see an economic analysis provided by everybody, every single party. But there were some that did provide some data. And of course, the source part of what was provided on record is something that I'm trying to figure out how to weigh in the decision, and what we're looking at in terms of, as what is shared here as giving the weight it deems appropriate, which is in our statute. So I just wanted to kind of share that perspective of what's going on in my head. Yes, member. Sure, sure. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, come on.
Thank you.
Oh, it's going on 8 o'clock? It's going on 8 o'clock.